What was the most amazing king hunt ever seen in a Chess Olympiad? I'm Grandmaster Max Illingworth, and today I'm going to take you through Tiger's epic king walk. Now, this is not the celebrity Tiger Woods, but rather an amazing game by the Swedish Grandmaster Tiger Hillarp Persson, who is known for his very creative approach to chess. So let's see this game. I'm going to focus more on the later part, but let's see it from the beginning. So the game went knight f3, d5, g3. So king's Indian attack. Black also went for a fianchetto at g6. And now rather than playing the normal king's Indian attack setup with playing for the e4 break, Hillarp Persson played the more modern approach of going c4 and attacking the pawn from a flank, to which black probably should play the move d takes c4, is the most reliable way to equalize. But instead, Tomas Hillarp, the Lithuanian IM playing as black, he played the move c6 in this position. Actually, I should show you the faces of the two players. So this is Tiger Hillarp Persson playing as white, and this is a picture of Tomas Hillarp playing with the black pieces. So you can see what both the players look like now. And here white played a nice move of b3. They were writing about an article many years ago. And the point of this double fianchetto ready approach is that the bishops do a very good job of controlling the central squares. And after castles and castles, black sap is a little more passive with c6 compared to if he had put the pawn on c5 and played d4, for example. So after a5, white played knight c3 to stop the advance of the a pawn. Black tried to use the pin with knight to e4. Perhaps knight a6 was a possible improvement for black to develop the knight. But as it was, we had knight a4, bishop b2, knight b2. And white's fairly happy to trade the dark squared bishops, as it leaves the black king a little bit exposed in the long term. Black played knight d7. A natural developing move, but maybe not the most precise. We had d3, knight ef6. And now I just played a move d4, not allowing black to take the center with e5. And I think that white has a pleasant advantage here, since, well, he has more space in the center. And it's not obvious where black's counterplay really comes from, since breaks like b5 can be pretty easily ignored in general, though maybe this was still a good try for black. In the game, black went for a more solid approach with b6. We had rook c1, bishop b7. White played the move knight d square. Certainly the immediate knight e5 was also possible, using this strong point in white's camp, or rather in black's half of the board. So black played rook c8. It's a move that looks natural, but I think white was quite happy to see it. After knight fe5, it's still not obvious where black's counterplay is coming from. And if black were to play a slow move like e6, for example, white can already think about moves like c5 as a way to fix the c6 pawn as a weakness and to keep the bishop and the rook shut in this structure. Since if black were to play b5 to avoid a white knight coming into c5, then, well, it would leave the black position very passive and white with a permanent space advantage in this case. So white would be better as well in this position, and so black tried to change the position with the move knight takes e5. And here white started to play very creatively. I'm not sure if it was really necessary for him to be so creative, because I think that a normal move like knight e5 would give white a very serious advantage, since the white bishop is a lot better than black's. White has a nice space advantage. And black's even slightly weakened his queen side, which is something we might exploit with either cd5 or c5, depending on black's subsequent play. So I think the simple approach was best, but white decided to go all creative with d5 instead, kicking the knight away, but at the price of slightly damaging the pawn structure. In this position, actually, the best move might have been to play a move like rook c2, which at the moment might seem like a very weird choice that doesn't make a lot of sense. But when you see what happened in the game, then the idea of rook c2 will become a lot clearer. So after queen d2, Turns out this natural developing move is actually a mistake, because after this, black played the move dc4, and after rook c4, black then played the move of knight takes c5, winning a pawn because of the pin against the knight. And now we can understand why rook c2 is an important move to play, so that you can play queen d2 without running into knight e5. I'm not sure whether this was necessarily a blunder or whether this was a deliberate pawn sacrifice. It's possible it could be somewhere in the middle. So Tiger played the move rook h4, threatening a queen h6 and queen h7 checkmating attack. Therefore, black prevented this with h5. White played rook d1, and well, this is the way the game starts to get really exciting and where I'm going to go a lot deeper into the analysis. So after knight d3, white didn't play the automatic capture on d3, since you don't really want to trade queens when you're a pawn down, but leaving yourself an isolated pawn is not ideal either. So Tiger played the move queen to h6. Technically speaking, maybe queen e3 was more precise. So in this position, black found a very precise defense, and well, since you're here, I assume to improve your chess as well as to be entertained. I'll set this as a puzzle for you. Now we're getting to the meaty part of the game. So what do you think would be the best defense for black in this position, with black to move? Now those of you who've watched several of my videos will know already that you can pause the video whenever I ask you a question, giving you the opportunity to try to solve it as if you had an actual game or with an actual puzzle program, so that you can become a much better player by learning more actively. That's what we do here at Illingworth Chess. Okay, so the best move for black is to play queen d6. And the reason other moves tend to be not as effective is because white has the option to go rook h5 and then queen g5 for a perpetual check. So by playing queen d6 ensures that rook h5 is no longer so effective, as the queen can come to defend along the third rank. So white played rook f6, rook d3, black played queen f6, where it is perhaps kick the queen away if necessary. White played bishop e4, and black again found a very precise defense, where he didn't panic about any ideas such as the rook h5 threat, threatening to crash through on the h-file. Instead, he kept up the momentum with bishop a6. And after rook e3, white is still a pawn down, but with all of these pieces around the black king, white certainly has some practical chances. So I think black's next move was very precise here. I really quite impressed with his move. What do you think was the defense that black played here? Well, there are two options I see that make a lot of sense. One is to just ignore the idea of rook h5, playing rook f8. And then if white does play rook h5, going for the perpetual check with gh5 and bishop h7 and this kind of thing. So black doesn't have to accept the draw though. He can just play queen g7, basically forcing the queens off the board. And since black has got the occupation of the d-file, that gives black a quite nice advantage, since the rooks are suddenly a little bit misplaced. However, the move black played of the immediate queen g7 is also very good, and arguably a bit more ambitious, since it aims to keep the extra pawn alive, but it does give white a bit more play in return. So we had queen g5. It's still not too late for black to go queen f6 if he wants to test white, but he decided to be more ambitious and play rook cd8, going for ideas of rook d1. And this is where the game really spices up, from being just an interesting game to an absolutely incredible game. So one question I'm sure that comes to your mind is, well, is it safe to take that pawn on e7? Is it a poison pawn, or can we take it with impunity? Well, I'll give you a moment to think about it. What would you play as white in this position? So it turns out that this is a position where you may as well take the pawn anyway, because if, say, you play a move like king g2 to avoid rook d1, then they can just play e6 and black is just a solid pawn up more or less for nothing. Well, maybe g4 gives some practical chances, but trying to open up the h-file for the rooks. But it's not it's not the most promising approach for white, let's say. Turns out queen e7 is indeed the right move, since it turns out that black's attack is actually not all that scary. Funnily enough, the computer actually wants to play a move like bishop c8, which I would say is not really a human move, because certainly the bishop looks quite natural on and active on a6. But I think it's aimed against avoiding any g4 businesses. I think the point behind this move, if I understand it correctly. But instead, black went for the more natural line of rook d1, and then queen a1, which is also perfectly fine. And this is where white threw caution to the wind, where the normal move for white would be to play rook f1, rook g1, and king f3. And so if king bishop c8, go king h4 and run the king to safety on the king side, which is a very creative idea, and surprisingly there doesn't seem to be any way to actually mate their king when it gets to g4, meaning it might actually be better to go queen g7 instead. And the line's a bit crazy, but basically after rook f6, dealing with the g5 threat. And after g5, black is threatening to go bishop to c8 with a very embarrassing check on the white king. So white would have to play rook c6 and if bishop c8, then to sack the exchange. And ultimately, I think this position after rook d3, it seems that white has sufficient compensation for the exchange, since there are some quite serious threats against black's king as well, if black doesn't keep the momentum. But objectively, it does appear to be a draw with best play, according to the engine, in what is currently quite an unclear position. So in the game, white played bishop c6, sort of risking a lot more. Basically saying, well, okay, I'm going to let you chase my king to f3. I'm not really afraid of your attack on the king. And it's a very double-edged approach where the thing with creative players is that when their play works, they look like an absolute genius. But when it doesn't work, it sort of looks like it was just, putting way too much caution to the wind and taking very unreasonable risks. In this game, it did pay off for white, but to challenge you a little bit, I'll see if you can find a better move for black than what he played. So what would be your suggestion for black in this position here? Now, I think this will be a good calculation exercise even for the titled players, where the fact that a strong IM as black didn't find the best move should give you a clue this position deserves some very serious thought. Well, in the game, black played the very natural move of queen to f1 in this position, trying to threaten some queen g2. It turns out the move is technically a mistake. So what would be a better move instead? I think that the best move for black by far is actually to play rook f1. It's not like a deadly quiet move where we threaten to play queen e1 and crash on f2, but surprisingly there doesn't seem to be a whole lot that white can do about it. If he does play a move such as rook to f4, so that he can meet queen e1 with king g2 and defend the pawn this way, then the danger comes from a different angle, where black has this move of rook c1. And yeah, it's a very clever tactic, because it's very easy to assume that after bishop d5, the attack on the king is simply decisive, right? But here black has a very cunning tactic, based on the fact that if you can get the queen to h1, it's checkmate. And so the move rook c7 is a winner, where it's very hard to see in advance that it's important to lure the rook to f4 to make this rook c7 work, since obviously queen c7 runs into queen h1 checkmate. But this is something you could say is almost like a computer sort of idea, which doesn't mean we should just ignore it entirely, of course, but it gives you an idea of just how difficult black's problems were, that he had to find some quite special tactical ideas to refute white's play. I should point out also that bishop f7 is not enough for white either. After rook f7, the black king proves to be perfectly safe, as the black queen is a good defender as well as an attacker. So in the game, black played queen f1, and this is where we get to see Tiger's epic king walk. Actually, I heard one person even say that the correct pronunciation was actually like Tigger, not Tiger, like after Tigger character in Winnie the Pooh. But Tiger sounds more fun, so I'm just going to say Tiger, because I think that, I think that Tiger Person's earned the nickname of being called a tiger after this game. So after queen to f1, White found a really impressive and creative idea. And since you've seen the title of the video already, I think you know what the move is that White played. Yeah, he played the move king to f4 with the point that, well, we'll see queen takes f2 in the game. Funny enough, Black actually seems to still be in the game if he finds this very unlikely defense where the move queen a1 seems to be the only real move for Black. The point is that if White plays king g5, you can sort of bring the rook around and kind of avoid the Nigel Short style checkmating patterns that we see in the game, as the Black king will be able to basically annoy the White king as it approaches g7. Still a completely chaotic position, though it does seem that White, with its extra pawn, is doing well with correct play. Where apparently king g5 and then bishop d5 works quite well, since you're able to block the pin with rook c5, rook e5, which is quite a big help here. But in the game, Black played queen f2, and it's a very natural move to take a pawn with check, but unfortunately it's a decisive mistake because of White's move king g5, and it's really quite unbelievable, but the king is actually perfectly safe on g5. And not only that, but the king actually takes a starring role in launching the mating attack against the Black king. We'll even see it in the game, which is pretty epic. Now, if Black tries a move like rook c1, trying to counterattack this way, White will simply play rook f4, since if Black were to move the queen to safety, then White can either go king h6 and play a deadly quiet move, or if rook c6, actually this is, well, we have the really epic combination of queen f7, and here the king is even playing a direct part in the mating net with rook e8, and after rook f8 and takes, it's a truly spectacular finish. In case this was too difficult for you, or too unnecessary complex, certainly the simple bishop d5 and crashing through on f7 is also completely crushing here, and in fact even forces mate as well. So after king fg7, he's trying to stop the queen coming in, but after rook f4, there's just no good defense to the invasion of the queen. Already computer says that queen f4 is the best move, but that's obviously quite hopeless to give up the queen like that. The game concluded with queen h2, queen f6, and since king g8 is running into king h6 and mate on g7, much like a very famous short Timon game, Black played king h7, but here White found the absolutely most clinical way to win. Do you see the sparkling finish for White in this case? Okay, full points to you if you came up with the move queen g6. Technically bring the rook to f3, like rook ff3 and queen f7 are also technically winning, but queen g6 is forcing checkmate, because if fg6 you have rook e7, and I should point out that king g8 would run into bishop d5 with a forced checkmate either after king h8 and rook f8, or if rook f7 you have rook e8 and obviously the rook is pinned, and then you have a checkmate on the very next move like this. And blocking with the rook doesn't really change all that much. You just take and the rooks just slide down to f8 and then to f7 with check, with a very similar mating pattern to what we just saw. So Black tried to move king h8 in desperation, but after king h6, Black resigned, since he's either going to get mated with the White queen or he's going to get mated by the White rook with fg6 and rook f8. Because I can't draw arrows properly, I'll show on the board just because it looks cool. So there you are. This was Tiger's epic king march. Or I could say king walk, but king march sounds more fun, right? So it turns out this wasn't just a game that was really fun and spectacular, but had a lot of really great teaching points as well, where we saw how the king can be used as a fighting piece, sometimes even in the middle game. It's a case where if you don't see a way to defend your king by keeping it in its position, then keep in mind you have the option to run, and the king might actually prove quite safe in the new shelter if you're able to regain control of the initiative. And yeah, we also saw some really great defensive lessons where you can also take a note of how Black should have defended instead, where for me the idea of bringing the rook to f1 and then swing the rook was really a very deep and profound concept that even now as a Grandmaster, makes a very big impression on me. So yeah, I'm glad that you really enjoyed this game. Congratulations on completing this lesson to the end. And I will see you in the next video, Chess Improvers, with another spectacular chess game. See you there.